Good morning, Boker Tov. It is a beautiful day out, is it not? It's really lovely to see the sunshine and to know that we get to start another day. Yeah, so many different ways to look at each new day, aren't there? Hope people are feeling rested and moving forward as we try to get a sense for what's going on around us. And here in Toronto, things like moving to stage 2, but also still being in a state of emergency and all these different details. Not always easy to understand, I don't think. Eventually, safe behavior yesterday is safe behavior today. So we shall see. Boker Tov, good morning. It is wonderful to be here together on this Thursday morning to take a little time here together on behalf of Temple Sinai Congregation of Toronto to connect, to reflect, and to remember. As this morning, we take an additional look at aspects of Parashat Korach, of our weekly Torah portion, and do so, however, in the light of a few of the prayers of our service that help us get our place in the morning. So let's join together this morning in the Hebrew and then the English of Asher Yatzar, of this prayer that celebrates the wonder of our creation. ברוך אתה, אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר יצר את האדם בחוכמה, וברא בו נקבים, חלולים, גלוי וידוע לפני כיסא כבודך, שאם יפתח אחד מהם, או יסתם אחד מהם, אי אפשר להתקיים ולעמוד לפניך. ברוך אתה, אדוני רופא כל בשר ומפליא לעשות. Blessed eternal God, creator of the universe, you have fashioned our bodies with wisdom, creating within us a finely balanced network. To stand before you in prayer is itself a fragile miracle. Eternal God, we praise you as the healer of body and spirit. Let's continue with the prayer for the soul as well. The soul that you have given me, O God, is a pure one. You have created and formed it, breathed it into me, and within me you sustain it. So long as my soul is within me, I will give thanks to you, eternal my God and God of my ancestors, source of all creation, sovereign of all souls. We praise you, eternal God, in whose hand is the power of all life and the spirit of all flesh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu v'fi amcha be'Yisrael. ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה, ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל. אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור. These are the obligations whose value cannot be measured. They nourish us in this world and help us to create the world to come. Kibud av va'em, to honor fathers and mothers. Ugmilud chasadim, to perform acts of love and kindness. Vashkamad Beit HaMidrash Shacharit ve'Arvit, to attend the house of study morning and evening. V'achnasat orchim, to welcome the stranger. Uvikul cholim, to visit the sick. V'achnasat kala, to provide for brides and grooms. V'lvayat hamet, to keep faith with the dead. V'yun tefillah, to pray with sincerity. V'ava'at shalom ben adam lechavero, to make peace when there is strife. V'tamud Torah keneged kulam, and the study of Torah is equal to them all. So let's join together in the Shema that reminds us that this day, as we are sitting in our homes, or as we are going by the way, that we can make a bond, that we can bind these words to our world and to ourselves through our actions and through our choices. Let's take a moment and join together in Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavecha ubechol nafshecha ubechol meodecha. Ve'ayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam. V'shivtecha bevetecha ubelechtecha b'derech ubeshochbecha ubkumecha. Ugshautam leot al yadecha, vayu letotafot beinenecha, uchtavtam al mezuzot betecha uvish alecha. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemo, daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amalta alehem, ve'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem ledorotam, v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf betil techelet, vaya lechem letzitzit, v'ritem oto, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם. ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. These words of Parashat Tzitzit, of course, as we talked about last week, come from chapter 15 of the book of Numbers, as it says at the top of your shared screen there, and in fact are the last words before this week's Parashat Korach. And they in fact have an influence on the interpretations of this week's Torah portion in what at first seems an odd way. The two different mitzvot that are discussed here in Shema, not just in Parashat Tzitzit, are the issue of the Betil Techelet, of having a blue thread on the fringes of a four-cornered garment, like a talit today. And of course, we find in the first paragraph as well the mitzvah of mezuzah, of taking these words from Shema and putting them on the doorposts of our house. Now, this week's Torah portion involves the rebellion of Korach and his followers against Moses and Aaron and the leadership of the people. But interestingly enough, the commentaries put two questions, strange questions it would seem, in the mouth of the rebels. Well, one can wonder why they do it. They ask the following questions. If one is using a room as a library, and so it has within it many sacred Jewish books, many copies of Torah and Tanakh, of our Bible, and the first 5 books that are the essence and the foundation of our tradition, and it has all these words, then do you really need to put a mezuzah on the door? After all, the room itself is full of the words of Torah. And that's one question that they're understood to ask. And another one that they're expected to ask is, if one wears a four-cornered garment, a talit that is entirely the color techelet, entirely this blue color, does one need a fringe when in fact all of the garment's fringes or threads are already that color? Now, I admit just suggesting that they would ask these questions is really strange as well. I'm going to try to explain why they do it. But in order to do that, what we need to do first is we need to understand a little bit about who Korach and his rebellion, his rebellious group were, and to get a few hints about their psychology, just like we found in last week's parasha. We find in this part of the book of Numbers an enormous amount of psychology. And what do we find in the first 2 verses of this week's parasha, Numbers 16? Now Korach, son of Yitzhak, son of Kohat, son of Levi, took himself, along with Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliav, and On, son of Pelet, descendants of Reuben. They took themselves to rise up against Moses, together with who? Together with 250 chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. That last line, men of repute or people of repute, is a significant one, and you can see the last 2 Hebrew words in verse 2 are what's being translated there, Anshe Shem, people of a name. And it's understood by the commentators to speak about the corrupting influence of seeking to have one's name have a great amount of kavod, of honor, of being not respected, but acknowledged for one's place. There is an understanding in our tradition that real kavod, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is about action and is about being part of a larger, significant, sacred purpose. But it is difficult not to be seduced, not to have one take that feeling of being recognized and being acknowledged and start to search it out for its own sake. And once we begin to do that, once we believe that that sense of honor and kavod comes not from purpose and therefore is fleeting depending on what we're doing at a particular moment, but is something that we ought to or deserve to possess, then it changes our way of looking at the world. And so many of the commentaries say, why is it that these particular 250 quote unquote leading Israelites would have followed Korah? One of the main reasons was their need for recognition, their desire to be seen as and recognized as important on a regular basis. And once we allow ourselves to become addicted to that sense of acknowledgement and public recognition, it opens us up to a number of different behaviors that we would have seen through otherwise. And yet, that at that moment, then we tend instead to lean in the direction of things that give us personal recognition. And you can see what they said to Moses, you've gone too far and the whole community are holy. They're not wrong about that. But saying, why do you raise us up? Why do you raise yourselves up above the congregation? Make certain assumptions. And the assumptions of Korach's followers are important. If we go to the end of this particular section, when Moses says, actually, one second, I got to think a little bit ahead of myself. When Moses calls upon Datan and Aviram, he wants to have a conversation to try to avoid this kind of tragic conflict that's going to happen among the people. So in verse 12, it's understood to be quite important, Moses sent for Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliad, and they said, Lo na'aleh, we won't come up. And again, just like at the beginning of the parasha, they ask, Vayikach Korach, he took himself, he took something, what did he take? They want to know here, we will not come up, it literally says. They won't come up to where? What does it mean they won't go up? Well, look at these next two verses, and tradition says we get a hint here. Their response continues. Is it not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey? They actually see Egypt as a land flowing with milk and honey, to have us die in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us. Even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey and given us possessions of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out those men's eyes? And it repeats again, Lo na'aleh, we will not go up. What is this strange reference to removing their eyes? Of course, this is an image. And what is it that causes those people who are sighted not to be able to see? The answer of Torah in many places is shochad. It is that bribery blinds the eyes of those who otherwise see clearly. That Korach's followers, when they say we won't come up, that they believe that Moses was calling them in order to bribe them, to offer them certain perks that they would have, certain sarah, certain control and honor that would get them to move away from Korach and toward Moses. What does this tell us? It tells us that the followers of Korach, people who are focused on honor and on personal recognition, therefore saw every reach out, every conversation, everything that came to them in terms of their own assumptions. They assumed that Moses was trying to bribe them because that was the mindset in which they found themselves, believing that power is there to be taken and to be traded, as opposed to a responsibility to be earned. And once we have these basic assumptions, then what do? We apply the assumptions to everything that's happening, everything going on around us. And so that gets us back to this initial strange questions that Rashi and other commentators put in the minds of the rebels when they say they're asking, does a room full of Sfarim Kedoshim, of holy books, Sifrei Kodesh, does that need a mezuzah? If we have a talit that's entirely a blue thread, does it need a blue thread on the fringes? These are not questions. These are challenges. These are intended to be, if you will, trick questions, taking their mindset that they needed to lower Moses so they could raise themselves because they're seeing power as an end in itself and as a zero-sum game. Therefore, they take that and they pretend to be asking questions when in fact they're just looking for ways to create an opening and to leverage a position. A reminder that I think one of the reasons why Torah teaches us about the failings of our ancestors is because all human beings have challenges and failings. We wrestle with them. And to remind us also that the opposite is true, that just as assumptions and they can create a negative mindset on everything we do, the opposite is true. That likewise, when we bring positive assumptions, when we say, wow, my world can be a place of healing, or love, or support, when we look at the possibilities of each person around us and say, how can I be part of bringing holiness into the world? How can I serve? How can I show gratitude to those who are there for me? Then likewise, we tend to see the good and the meaningful in people. And it leads us to create a world that has, well, so much more goodness and sweetness and blessing in it. Hopefully we can do that for each other. But likewise, I hope that's something that we really can do, not just for each other, but especially for all those who at this challenging time are there for us or who need us to be there for them, those who are ill, those who are isolated, and likewise those who take their place on the front lines for our benefit. For all of them, let's join together in these words of refuah. Mishberach Avotenu Avraham, Yitzchak, Ve'Yaakov, V'imotenu Sarah, Rivka, Leah, Rachel, Lo yirapeh kol makotenu, yiratzon melfenecha Adonai Eloheinu, lachal imam u'leraputam, v'yishlach lanu mehera, refuah shlema, v'ateret shalom, v'nomar Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors bless and heal all who suffer. May it be the divine will to provide healing and strength. Reveal to us the holiness of life, the wholeness of shalom, and together we say, Amen. And so now we take a moment to remember, recalling the loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at the season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. During the period of Shloshim, the last 30 days, we extend our condolences to the families of Bill Schmelzer, Ralph Rothstein, Ben Wertlib, Anita Fleischer, Lillian Gain, Reuben Devlin, Jerry Goldstein. And it is our sad duty to report the death of our member and past president, David Garber, husband of Riva, father of Michael and Alyssa. The graveside funeral will take place today at 2 p.m., Pardes Shalom Temple Sinai section. And likewise, it is our sad duty to announce the death of Zena Werb, sister of Marcia and Michael Werb. The funeral will now take place this Friday at 1 p.m., likewise from Pardes Shalom Temple Sinai section. I'm also just recognizing that the Shloshim, the 30 days since the death of George Floyd, have now passed. One can hope that the learning and the influence of these painful events and others like them can only continue to have significant growth potential for our society that so desperately needs to grow beyond prejudice and hatred. On this day, on the third day of Tammuz, on your site, we remember Louis Appleby, Annette Carson, Lena Glassman, Manuel Hart, Norman Rabkin, Raymond Ray Sadowski. Zichronam Livracha. May the memories of all of them be a blessing. Our griefs and our sympathies are mingled as we turn together to words sanctified by memory, words glorified by hope in the Kaddish Yatom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehe shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, יתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה ברכו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, ואמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and bring comfort and strength to all who remember. And together we say, Amen. May this be a wonderful and meaningful day for each and every one of you. And for us, we continue to hold in our hearts all those who are ill and their families as well. Let's be for them today as we make this strong and good and beautiful day. Boker Tov. I hope this day is a very meaningful one for all of us.